Welcome back to our channel. In this episode, we are set to explore one of the most profound concepts in Christian theology and Greek philosophy: logos, the word that changed history. Throughout this exploration, we will delve into a term that has profoundly influenced religious thought and philosophical discourse for centuries. Logos, often translated as word in English, holds a rich history and significance that extends beyond its literal meaning. Come with us as we journey through its origins, unveil its meanings, and unravel its implications in both ancient and theological contexts. Welcome to our exploration of the concept of logos. Logos, often translated as word in English, originates from the Greek verb lego, meaning to lay, to pick out, or to gather. It represents the act of gathering thoughts and pairing them with the perfect words to express them through speech. Logos doesn't just mean to speak, but instead it means the entire process where a thought begins in the mind, passes through the brain, and goes out into the world as speech. As you can see, we picked a fun journey to adventure on this time. Join us as we unravel the layers of logos and discover its powerful impact on both ancient Greek thinking and early Christian belief. The concept of logos evolved significantly from the 6th century BC to the 1st century AD. Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic philosopher, described it as a cosmic principle of order and knowledge underlying the universe. This implied the universe was not random, but ordered. Later, the Stoics introduced the concept of logos spermatikos, a generative principle of the universe. Logos spermatikos, as understood by the Greek Stoics, refers to the seminal reason or generative principle that pervades and animates the universe. This concept signifies that the universe is ordered and governed by a rational principle, often equated with God or nature, which directs the development and organization of all things. Each human being possesses a portion of this divine logos, reflecting the Stoic belief in a universal reason that connects all aspects of the cosmos. Philo of Alexandria integrated logos into Jewish philosophy, distinguishing between the spoken word and the inner word. In this understanding, logos has a physical meaning, which is to speak, and a spiritual meaning, the inner logos, which is mind. By the 1st century, the epistles of Paul and the Gospel of John merged Greek philosophical ideas with emerging Christian theology, identifying logos with Christ as the divine word and generative principle of the universe through which all things were created. In the Old Testament, logos is loosely associated with the Hebrew word davar. Strong's 1697, which means speech. There are a few times in the Old Testament where davar is personified and attributed with divine qualities, such as being a healer or the culmination of God's thought, becoming the physical world, as we find in Psalms 107:20 and Isaiah 55:11. In these contexts, davar certainly would be the equivalent of the New Testament logos. The concept of logos was central in Judeo-Alexandrine philosophy, particularly in the works of Philo of Alexandria. Philo, a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher living in Alexandria, viewed logos as a mediating principle between the divine and the material world, describing it as the divine reason or the intermediary through which God interacts with the world. He believed that the logos was essential for understanding God's presence in both the sensible and intellectual realms, acting as a unifying principle that holds the universe together. Philo characterized the logos as both the divine mind and the manifestation of God's existence in creation, symbolizing its dual function as a part of God's essence and an active force in the world. When we take a closer look at Philo's writing, we start to see the many similarities between his thoughts on logos and Paul's thinking on Christ. Philo states that the Logos is the firstborn of God and acts to hold the universe together. And in Colossians 1:17 we read, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." In Deuteronomy, there is a story about the Hebrew people drinking water from a well or a rock. Philo symbolically refers to the rock as Logos, or divine wisdom, and Paul, in 1 Corinthians 10:4, calls the rock Christ.
And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from the spiritual rock accompanying them, and the rock was Christ. 1 Corinthians 10:4.
Philo calls the Logos the image of the invisible God. In 2 Corinthians and 1 Colossians, Paul calls Christ the image of the invisible God.
The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and in him. Colossians 1:15 through 16.
Philo states that there are two archetypes of man, the first Adam and the second Adam. Paul writes that the first Adam became a living soul, and the last Adam became a living spirit. It seems pretty obvious that Philo of Alexandria had a large influence on the Apostle Paul and his approach to explaining Christ. The author of the fourth Gospel may or may not have been familiar with the writings of Philo, as it is not evident from his writing style. However, since Paul's description of Christ predates the Gospel of John, it is more likely that John derived his concept of Christ from Paul. Philo merged Greek philosophy with Jewish theology, creating a dualistic concept for God, and Paul adopted many of Philo's ideas, naming the second God as Christ. Both John's Gospel and Paul's letters combine the ideas of a mediating principle and a creative force that brought forth creation. This connects the twin metaphors of an invisible Father God creating our physical universe, symbolized as the beloved Son. Another interesting aspect to the Gospel of John is that John describes God as being one and two at the same time. The Logos was with God and was God at the same time. John then tells us that everything in the created world came into being through the Logos. This oneness and separation within God exactly parallels Genesis chapter 1, when God begins as the monistic waters and ends as darkness and light. If we understand that in the spiritual context Logos means mind or consciousness, and we use that as the proper translation for Logos in the Gospel according to John, we get the following.
In the beginning was consciousness, and consciousness was with God, and God was consciousness. He was in the beginning with God. All things through him came into being, and without him nothing is that has become. John 1:1 through 3.
The term Logos is used in various contexts in the New Testament, requiring interpretation based on its specific usage. For example, in Matthew 12:36, the standard translations say this:
But I tell you that men will give an account, Greek logos, on the day of judgment for every careless word, Greek rhema, they have spoken. Matthew 12:36.
A more accurate translation from the original Greek would be,
But I say to you now that for every careless word men will speak, they will give logos on the day of judgment for it.
In this passage, Jesus seems to convey that our words have significant impact, especially in our present reality. Ultimately, it is not the words that condemn us, but instead, it is the mind or logos behind the words that will condemn us. The day of judgment is not seen as some distant future event, but rather as the present moment. In this interpretation, we are accountable for where we focus our conscious attention, mammon or God. In the following verse, Matthew 12:37, the conventional translation implies that individuals will be judged based on their spoken words, which seems overly harsh.
For by your words, logos, you will be acquitted, and by your words, logos, you will be condemned. Matthew 12:37.
An alternative translation would be,
From your consciousness, you will be made righteous or unrighteous.
by understanding logos as the focus of consciousness or mind within us, we can comprehend how the direction of our conscious attention, either inwards towards God or outwards towards the world, forms our individual righteousness. The concept of logos in John's Gospel and Paul's letters are a profound theological statement that bridges Jewish, Greek, and early Christian thought. It encapsulates the idea of Christ as the divine logos, the ultimate revelation of God, and the mediator between the spirit and physical realms. Understanding logos in the New Testament as it was intended to be understood enriches our comprehension of the Gospel's message and its historical and philosophical context. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of logos. If you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.